Thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program. This is a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew LeDrew, author of such novels as Touch Your Nose and Jacoby Street, and founder of Engine Books. Let's see what we have today.
Hello, we are here on a very special episode of the Write Project podcast. We have three authors from the Breakwater Books collection, Us Now, stories from the Quilted Collective on the line. And they're going to be answering some of the questions most posed by you, the listeners of the Write Project podcast. On the line, we have Tzu-Hao, we have Xaiver Michael Campbell, and we have Dr. Richard Elcock, as well as collection editor Lisa Moore. Let's begin.
I almost called you Jermaine just then. No. Xaiver, do you view writing as a kind of spiritual practice at all? Like, do you see writing that way, or is it purely utilitarian for you, or somewhere in between?
There is a little bit of some catharsis that is achieved sometimes through writing, but spiritual, I wouldn't say spiritual. No.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very specific feeling, that kind of like spiritual feeling. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Xaiver. And what did you think, Richard?
I don't think I had thought about it until you put it that way, but as I kind of reflect on my own definition of spirituality and what encompasses that as I see it anyhow, I could see very much so why that the writing process would be seen that way. I know for me, similar to maybe faith-based spirituality, writing for me has absolutely been cathartic. I've written at times where I'm distraught, where I'm angry, where I'm down, where I'm optimistic, where I'm overjoyed. And I look back at those writings even years after the fact and realize that in that moment there was joy or there was healing by way of release through writing. So the ways that maybe we tap into whatever we define as the divine, absolutely, I think there can be moments where by writing, by creating, you feel more in tune with the divine or that greater whatever than you might be otherwise, right? When you're just in a zone where you're creating, you're expressing and relaying. I can totally see why one would see it that way. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Richard. And what did you think, Lisa?
Yes, I do. It makes me recognize the material world around me, and it grounds me in a way. And I have to start with what's close at hand when I'm writing. I start with sensual details that come to us through the senses, so through smell, through taste, and that is the way I kind of make my characters. And when I am looking for those details, I become more and more aware of the time and space that I'm living in, and that is a kind of spiritual practice. It makes me grateful for the world I'm in. And it makes me forget about a lot of distractions, and it brings me close to some kind of interrogation of what it means to be here. If I'm lucky.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Makes perfect sense. Beautiful. I'm always envious of people who can see it like that. For me, it's more like a weird addiction. I used to be a horrible smoker, and I also used to be, I'm not anymore, but I also used to drink far too much coffee. I'm down to 10 cups a day now. I jokingly tell people, it's not really a joke, but like I joke that I'm naturally predisposed to being an addict, and that's why I don't try anything harder than coffee, because I know I wouldn't do well with it. Yeah, but I'm that way with writing. Like, I would love to get to a point where I can be like serene and like it's a spiritual experience. For me, it's like this itch, this need where I get agitated if I don't do it. You know?
Oh, I don't know if I'm serene.
Okay.
I don't think you would ever find any person who has ever known me for any longer than a day who would ever use the adjective serene.
That's funny.
But, no, I'm definitely not serene. But I would like to be serene. But I do feel, and I am addicted too, because I'm definitely unhappy when I'm not writing.
Yeah.
It's an important part of, I just getting stuff down is important to me. But I also do, I do think there is something spiritual in it too.
Wonderful. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
Tzu-Hao, do you view writing at all as a kind of spiritual practice?
Exceptionally. So
Okay.
even when I'm not writing creatively, I'm still writing. I'm a very, very avid journal entry maker. I've been doing so since I was a kid. Apparently, I used to scribble on a big pad of paper, and then as soon as I could start spelling, I started spelling, and there was always something to write. And somewhere in the storage box from our old home in Taiwan, there's apparently at least 50 books of me and all the different entries that I wrote. And it could be something as simple as, I caught a bug today, to like reflections that I had as a teenager, as a young adult, and even to this day, reflecting as a working professional and a mom and the different aspects of my life. So there's I find when I write, I get to know myself just that much better. And journaling is one way to do that. But even when I write creatively, I can put myself in situations that I've never been before, and I can imagine how I might react if I were the characters in my creation. So I find that if I, writing is a very integral part of my life, whether creatively or otherwise, I find.
Interesting. This is the same question. This isn't one from the list or anything like that. People ask me a lot, like, oh, which character is based on you? And I kind of like look at them sideways and go, all of them.
Mm-hmm.
They're all from inside my head.
Mm-hmm.
In some way, they're all me. You know what I mean? Like, and that's true for every author. Like, nothing's really external. Like, you can base it off someone else, but it's all still from inside your head.
Exactly.
But that said, like, because something you said just made me think of this, but like when you do more consciously write about yourself, are you writing about the idealized version of yourself, do you think, or are you writing more about a negative version of yourself?
So this might make me sound strange, but I'm not much for the idealized version of myself, or frankly anyone, because I'm sure there are such things as perfect people out there. I haven't met them yet, and I have finally reached a place myself where I enjoy my flaws. The ones that cause problems, I enjoy looking for ways to improve them, and flaws that are harmless and just are a part of me, I've learned to embrace them. So I like exploring the flawed part of myself creatively as well. And sometimes it helped me figure out, well, maybe this is how you grow and mature, and otherwise it helps me accept that maybe this is part of who you are, and as long as it doesn't hurt anyone, maybe it's just better that you recognize this and incorporate that and enjoy it. And I think the only perfection, I think, is that we're perfectly flawed, and that's perfectly okay.
Okay, I like that. That's interesting. That's poetic. I kind of like that. Yeah, I feel like I'm always writing a negative version of myself, where it's almost like a confession, where it's like through fiction, like, look at this idiot. You know what I mean? Like, look at this complete idiot over here. Let's explore. the amount of readers I have that like the main characters in my books, and I'm like, oh, that's a mistake. It's like liking Walter White from Breaking Bad. It's like, no, you're not supposed to like this person. That says something about you.
But I mean, that's the mark of a really charismatic character that you've made, right? I mean, in your book. And the other thing is that I think when you're reading, like, not to say that people grab onto negativity, but I think when you see someone who's flawed, it might be easier to, empathize and understand their motivations, because I think, again, I'm sure there are perfect people out there. I just haven't met them yet. But
Yep.
It's easier for me to identify with someone who has a shortcoming because I know I have many of those.
Yeah. Oh, in my company, we open submissions for both fiction and now nonfiction every year. The nonfiction ones we get in every year, there's someone who's written a biography about their father or their grandfather or their great grandfather, and it's just this idealized portrait. And I've started having a line every time where I'm like, please don't tell me someone's great unless you're also willing to tell me how they were terrible. Because, like, I'm not looking for a fluff piece. You know what I mean? Right. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, next question. That was wonderful. Okay. I enjoyed that. How did publishing your first story change your process of writing, if at all?
I think in the drafting and the creating process, it's not much difference, because I find that, you in order to have something that's maybe in the future worth a second publication, I think it needs to come from the same place of sincerity and honesty. So I don't let that affect me, but I have to be honest, having gone through the publication process. I think in editing, I'm a little more careful.
Sure.
So that, like when it does go and then come back, I don't have to correct as many silly mistakes.
Yeah, that's fair. That's very fair. Try to make it easy on future you.
Yes.
Yep.
Planting the seed.
Yeah. What are common traps for aspiring authors, in your opinion? What are cognitive traps or pitfalls, mistakes that young authors make?
I think when everyone's first start out trying to be a writer, you think you have nailed a masterpiece right away, but that's really not how it happens. I mean, you write and you perfect your craft, and I'm sure there are some talented individuals that hit the nail on the head on the first go, but for most people, the act of creation and improvement is where you get to your next level and continue, and then that's how you polish and find that gem that eventually gets you the recognition.
Yeah. No, it's amazing the amount of authors that or artists in general that think they have to be perfect right off the bat. And if you compare it to literally any other discipline, it's revealed how stupid that is. Like, do you think that someone started running their first day of the Olympics, or you know what I mean? Like, that's insane.
I completely understand, but I think there's this strange, because I guess by the time you are known, you're already successful in that fashion. So most people feel like oh, this is a debut novel, this is a showcase and whatever, and there's that pressure and expectation. But I think that you have to remember the creative process is, just for lack of a better comparison, it's the iceberg, right? Like, you see the tip of it, or you see the podium, but underneath it is years and years of working through what inspires you, finding your own voices, and what works for you and what doesn't, and how you stitch that together to make it your work, and that it feels authentic, and it inspires you, and it makes you proud and stuff like that.
And like, I don't know, what I think authors don't realize at some level, a lot of authors, but like, let's say your early stuff wasn't great. Like, let's say you produce 10 books in your life, okay? And the 10th one is just a massive hit. Everyone loves it. Critical darling. Everyone adores it. You're a worldwide bestseller, giving talks everywhere, that kind of fantasy. People will retroactively go back, critics, and say how much they loved your first 9, no matter how much they ignored them at the start. Like, I love J.R.R. Tolkien. The Hobbit's a great book. The rest of it's utter trash. But like, because we love The Hobbit so much, we go and read Tree and Leaf and say that's good. I'm like, there's a reason that wasn't like all the unfinished tales. I'm like, there's a reason they weren't published. Like,
No, I understand.
Thank you very much, Sue. And what did you think, Xavier?
what are early mistakes that you make in your career that, or maybe that you've made recently because you're still early in, but like early traps that you do, cognitive traps, things you tell yourself, whatever that kind of sideline you.
Well, I definitely am still early in my career. Say that word loosely. But I would say, I guess, getting in your head about it being perfect, or especially like a particular detail. If you have something, I know with me, if I have something in my head, if I imagine a scene to be a certain way and I can't somehow seem to write it that way, it will sometimes take me a lot usually often a freak out in order to move on and just like write beyond that scene and then come back to it. And it's just like getting out of that linear frame of thought and think that like it has to be A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Like you could definitely probably write around the alphabet. It doesn't have to go from A to Z. If you're going to be stopping the whole creative process for weeks at a time because you're stuck on trying to get something like expressed perfectly, So
Yeah. That's actually good advice. That's good advice. I have a hard time doing that as well. Like I tend to do A to B, A to Z. Yeah. That's cool. I'm gonna pin that up somewhere. That's really good advice, actually.
Thank you very much, Xavier. And what did you think, Lisa?
Well, one of them I think is a very simple one to talk about, which is the last paragraph of a short story, say, where a writer feels this profound urge to sum up what the story was about. And I often find that the penultimate paragraph is the one that is really the ending of a story, because I think we have this, like, we've invested so much work in writing a story or even a novel, and we want to make sure the reader got it, that they understood what we, all the fruits of our labors. So we tell them what it means, and of course that's a mistake, because you have to trust the reader. You have to believe that the reader has been with you there all the way, and that they are getting it the whole way through. So that's a pretty common mistake that pretty much everybody makes, I think, because we care so much about our stories that we want to make sure that they're doing what we think they are supposed to do.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
And I would say another problem is to maybe begin with plot instead of character. I think some people are magnificent at plot, and they really see plot through character. But if plots seem murky to begin with to the writer, if they are not quite sure where they're going, trust the characters that they're building, and trust that the characters will bring them where they want to go, and just recognize that every story has to have conflict. That's my advice.
That's brilliant. That's really good. I like both of that. Yeah. Sounds great. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
And what did you think, Richard?
Thank you for saying young. I don't know if it still applies, but I'm going to go with it. In terms of things that we may fall into, as someone who had been away from writing for a long time before getting back into it as a member of the Quilted Collective, I would say that certainly kind of feeling that it needs to be perfect and you need to have it phrased just right before getting it onto paper maybe was one of the pitfalls I found myself falling into. It was almost hard to get ideas from my mind onto paper initially. And I think just kind of brainstorming and just letting myself go, and you can turn back later and make it pretty and make it make sense afterwards. But just getting raw ideas out there on paper can be really helpful, as opposed to thinking that every sentence needs to be gold as it moves from your fingertips to Microsoft Word, right? So yeah, that would be, I think, the caveat that would exist there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, big time. I really agree there. That my old adage is done is better than perfect.
How about
you know
that?
what I mean?
Totally agreed. Totally
Yeah.
agreed.
It's not an edict that I would bring over into your professional life as a medical professional.
Correct.
Yeah. Like, heart surgery. Done is better than perfect.
There you go. Let's just
Yeah,
get
yeah.
it done, wrapped and over with, right?
Yeah.
Not
Get out
so
of here
much.
by 5.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Not so much. Yes.
Have you ever read anything that made you think differently about fiction? Something that kind of turned on your light bulb of like what fiction could be?
I would say, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about Haroon and the Sea of Stories. And I believe that we had read that back in grade 9, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that in particular was just, it was so wildly creative and so extremely different than anything I had read up until that point, and just kind of unlocked my imagination entirely. So I would say definitely I would credit that book with that particular experience for me. Mhm.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
Love that. Okay. I'm going to check that one out.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Xaiver, have you ever read anything that made you think differently about fiction? Like, just like you read it and you were like, bam, and you thought differently about writing fiction from that point on? That's a big question.
That is a big question. I think it's weird. Did it change my perspective on how I thought about fiction? But when I talk about running, that novel, when I read it, he's talking about running. He's talking about running marathons, but it's like he's also talking about writing and like I guess the act of continually. Is it novel writing or just writing in general? And the process of training and I guess all of your writings so far, I guess all my short story writings, it being training for like the larger marathon of writing a novel. I don't know if that's what he was talking about. Maybe that's what I got from that novel, but did it change my entire perspective? Yeah, in a sense. Now I don't know if it changed but it definitely added to how I look at writing and how I look at like approaching a larger project and the act of like doing things beforehand to keep my skill up to like scruff kind of, I guess, to keep doing it so that I don't just like automatically, I'm like one day I'm like, oh, I'm gonna run a marathon and have never like trained beforehand and just like I was gonna write this novel and I've never probably like written a paragraph or a short story or like something beforehand.
Sounds good. Okay. Yeah, that's an excellent answer.
Thank you very much, Xaiver. And what did you think, Sue?
Have you ever read anything that made you feel differently or think differently about fiction? So have you ever read something that just changed your perception on what fiction is?
Nothing fictional has done that for me, but in terms of writing in general, I think one of the most powerful book I've ever read, and I think a lot of people in the Newfoundland curriculum probably would have read this before, Ellie Wiesel's Night.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was a account of how he survived the Holocaust, and his language was very simple, very matter of fact. There was no flourishing. There was no in-depth details of how he has suffered, although one assume and can understand there was great suffering. Like he went in with his entire family, only he came out. And it's just the way how he accounted for everything. There was, I don't know if it was a reflection of his state of mind at the time, how he felt about the whole thing, or maybe that's a traumatic response and you don't want to get into too much detail, but it's just the way that he spoke about himself and his experiences seemed so, it's a matter of fact, this is what I've gone through and now I'm on the other end and let's move on. And it's just in behind the very simple and short sentences hid so much of the pain, horrors, and sufferings. And it's just the words there. It's such a powerful piece, and it tells me that what you leave unsaid is that much more powerful than what appears on the pages.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. That sounds incredible. I gotta check out that one. I can't believe I haven't read it. Okay. Sounds good. What are you reading right now? No cheating, no anything like that. What are you reading at this moment? What's on your nightstand on your to be read pile right now?
There's a really fascinating book written by Jessica Lee. So it's not a fiction. It's actually a memoir about her journey searching through her, researching her grandparents' life and kind of like connecting with her Taiwanese root. So she is a, let me get this straight and get this right. She's a Taiwanese British Canadian who's currently based in Berlin. And this memoir called Two Trees Make a Forest. The title is actually very clever. So like the characters for wood, put two of them together, it's forest. So I think that's where she got the title from. So
that's cute.
It's about her journey and her spending some time in Taiwan after both her grandparents pass away, and they find letters and stories in their belongings. So her grandfather had passed away from and he was experiencing dementia before that. So, you know, in the book, she mentioned that before he was gone, he was already gone from her. So then in discovering his letters that, and you can see even in the traces of the letters that he was composing, he was starting to mix up timelines, but specific incidents were like little sparks along the letters that he's written. So that gave her a little more material to research. And she is I can't remember the proper title for it, but she's basically sort of a combination of an anthropologist, but she also studies botany. So I don't know how that comes together, but it gave her the means of researching and access to files for her grandfather, who served in the Republic of China's Air Force during the civil war between the communists and the nationalists. And her grandmother was from Nanjing, which was around the time when the Nanjing massacre happened during the Sino-Japanese War. So there was a lot of trauma there for her grandmother to deal with as well. So I'm just coming up to the part in the book where she's traced enough to piece together, figure out how her grandparents had met. So it's all very interesting. And then for me personally, because I have biracial children, that would be in that background, I guess. So I really want to see what the journey was like for her to take, and then maybe someday down the road my kids could do something similar.
Interesting. Okay, that's cool. I have so much to read now. Do you hide any secrets in your books that only a few people will ever understand the reference to into your stories?
Oh, I put inside jokes in everything. Absolutely everything.
I love inside jokes. I'd love to be a part of one someday.
Maybe you will be.
Awesome. Perfect.
Thank you very much, Sue.
Xaiver, do you ever hide any secrets in your books or in your stories that only a few people will ever find? I guess where it's like semi-autobiographical, you could easily be like, hey, here's this nugget from my friend.
Yeah, there's definitely. Oh yeah, because I also, the notes app on my phone. I'm always, like I say to my friends, usually they say something funny or I find particularly funny or like really interesting. I'm like, I am going to steal that. I'm like, is that cool? And they're like, yeah, write it. I'm like, yeah, sure, go for it. And I'll just write it down in my notes app. Or like I see something on someone's Insta story, like my close friends or something. And I'll be like, that is good. And I'll like make a note of it and like add it as like an interesting detail in a larger work. And yeah, so definitely a little homage to the people who inspire me. But yeah, they'd have to read it to find it.
Awesome. Encouraging them to read it through I used to pull a trick when I was young, which is horrible. I had a character that wasn't based on anyone, and he wasn't like a useful character too, actually. And they weren't based on anyone. They were just blank slate characters that bopped around the school that it was based in. Anyone who asked if they were in the novel, I would tell them they were that character, and that they would have to read it to see how I portrayed them, because they were so blank. And that's how I used to sell the novel to my friends. Like when it was like this little self-published thing back in the day. Oh, that was based on you. Read it and see what happens. It's horrible. It's awful. Such a hack am I.
All right, well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.